I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, your moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap today, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will be able to access it later on demand. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during the presentation today you have a question for any of our panelists, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. And we'll take a few minutes before the end of today's webinar and go through the audience questions. And finally, at the end of today's webinar, we will be doing a drawing for 3 $50 Amazon gift cards. So stick around, hopefully you will be one of our big lucky winners. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Fireside Chat, how Edmunds deploys multiple times per day, delivering an unrivaled customer experience. Our speakers today are Stephanie Bird, who is Technical Lead at Cloud Services at Edmunds.com, Daniel Lee, who is a Team Leader at Grafana, and Jim Hirschauer, who is Director of Product Marketing at Instana. Welcome to you all. Thanks for joining me today.
All right, thank you, Charlene. And hello, everyone. My name is Jim Hirschauer, and I lead product marketing for Instana. Welcome to this Fireside Chat with Edmunds and Grafana. So today, our guests are going to be talking about migrating to microservices, deploying new releases multiple times per day, and monitoring application performance at Edmunds. And Edmunds is one of the most respected automotive websites in the world. We'll discuss the reasons that Edmunds decided to change their architecture, the migration process they used, some of the challenges they faced, and the factors that ultimately led to a successful CI/CD process. Of course, Edmunds is an Instana customer, so we'll also discuss the role that monitoring and Grafana dashboards played in Edmunds' journey to microservices and CI/CD. So let's take a moment to meet our panel. Joining us are Stephanie Bird, Cloud Ops Technical Lead at Edmunds.com, and Daniel Lee, Team Lead at Grafana Labs. Welcome to you both. Stephanie, why don't you take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Edmunds?
Edmunds.com is a car shopping website today. It was actually established in 1966 as a publication, but it was in the 1990s, it was able to successfully transfer to a website. Our goal is to make car shopping easy, and we, in today's market, car shopping is very stressful, and we try to give you the tools and reviews that you need to be able to make that journey a little bit easier.
All right, well, thanks, Stephanie, for that great introduction to Edmunds. Daniel, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself and Grafana to our listeners also?
Yeah, hi, Jim. So my name is Daniel Lee, and I have a software engineer background, but these days I am the team lead for the team that works on open source Grafana. So we're only up to 20 people. So for those who don't know Grafana, it's a dashboarding and visualization tool for metrics. It's open source. It's super popular. I think we have like 3 million users. And the goal and the reason why it was created is to basically, visualize the things that are invisible. So our goal is, we talk about like democratizing metrics, takes the stuff that we do, like the IT and engineering stuff that is mostly invisible. It's on servers somewhere in the cloud or out of sight, and help visualize that. And that pictures speak louder than words. And by visualizing and putting it up on a TV somewhere, it makes it available to everybody, not just engineers, but even so the business people at work. They can see how your website is doing, or you use it for capacity planning, things like that. It's commonly used in operations for server monitoring, but it is actually quite general, so it can visualize anything that is metrics, as time series data. It's also big in IoT, and it's starting to take off in industrial engineering as well. It's super common in like the cloud native space, so it's the front end for Prometheus as well, which is used a lot for monitoring Kubernetes. But it supports tons of different databases, and which is one of its key strengths, that you can like visualize data from lots of different sources and mix and match on the same dashboards. So as I mentioned before, it's used a lot on TVs, but we're starting to move into being more interactive and adding log support, so you can look at your metrics and then switch over and look at your logs as well. It's very flexible, so you can have, like I said, dynamic dashboards that can be reused for different environments. And like a year or two ago, we added alerting support as well. You can send notifications to email and Slack and PagerDuty and more. And it's also super extensible. So even we have lots of published plugins like the Instana data source, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. People build their own custom integrations to be able to visualize data from their internal systems, which also I think makes it more popular.
All right, thanks for that introduction, Daniel. So as I mentioned earlier, I work for Instana, and for anyone who's not already familiar with Instana, we are the premier application performance monitoring solution for microservices applications. Instana was founded in 2015, and we've quickly captured significant market share with over 250 paying customers. The real keys to Instana's success are the facts that our software automatically discovers and monitors your services, including the full stack, and we continuously visualize and analyze the data looking for performance issues. We're also able to automatically determine the root cause of most problems as a result of really deep visibility and something called the dynamic graph. Now, if you're not familiar with our dynamic graph, it is a continuously updated real-time dependency graph that models your applications as they really are and not as we expect them to be. So this is really a unique capability to Instana, and it's a key enabler to most of our really valuable capabilities. So we'll see the impact of the dynamic graph a little bit later on today. So now that we've gotten through all of the introductions, let's get right to the reason why we're all here. So we want to learn about how Edmunds.com managed to transform themselves from a paper publication to a DevOps powerhouse that successfully deploys updates multiple times per day. So Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit about Edmunds' technology stack before you migrated to microservices? So
Edmunds, like I said earlier, first introduced their website in 1995. We were running with internal data centers on our bare metal host. Then eventually we migrated to an internal cloud, which allowed us to provision a little bit faster for new services coming online. And then we followed that by a transition to Amazon EC2 host, which allowed us to enable auto scaling and even faster provisioning for new services.
Yeah, that's certainly a progression that a lot of companies are undertaking today at lots of different stages. So what about microservices? Why did you decide to transition to microservices, and what was the process that actually got you there?
So we were at a stage where we could provision new services very quickly, and we could utilize the auto scaling to expand and contract as the traffic grew. So our next initiative is how do we bring the services up faster? Because even on EC2, there's overhead taken with bootstrapping a new host. So we took a look at Docker, which was just coming online back then, and we decided to try it out on a few artifacts. We managed to get it made the building the containers faster, but also simpler because we could guarantee the configuration on every build. And so as we tested it with a few artifacts, we found that it was more positive, and so we eventually rolled it out into our entire environment.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about looking at Docker just as it was coming out. Let's talk about early adoption. It totally makes sense in your use case. So why don't you go ahead and now tell us about your current technology stack?
So today we are mostly running Node.js and Java applications. They're backed by Mongo and Elasticsearch. They're all container-based at this point. Yeah, that's about the extent of our technology stack.
Yeah. Yep. So were there really any major issues that you faced while you're migrating to microservices? And if so, how did you overcome those?
So the key to any successful migration is one, start slow and take it one step at a time, which is exactly what we did. So when Docker was first coming out, there wasn't a whole lot of documentation out there as to follow. So we took it one step at a time. We said, okay, now that we can do this step, let's try this next step. And that was critical for the migration, but it also allowed us to set up testing and automation throughout the entire process to make it very simple for us.
Yeah, and I know that you all use Instana throughout that process. And so you're at a place where you have many interconnected microservices. And let's talk for a second about the CI/CD process and how you're able to successfully deploy multiple times per day. So first of all, before you move to microservices, do you know how often updates were deployed?
So initially we were deploying every 3 months, and then we got it down to 3 weeks. Once we were able to get into microservices and automating the CD/CDI pipelines, we are now able to publish daily.
Out of curiosity, about how long was that transition between you were taking 3 months and then you shifted to multiple times a day? How long did it take you to get there?
So we've been slowly migrating over the last 5 years, and we started bringing daily deployments online about 3 years ago now.
Okay, and you mentioned multiple times per day, but how often do you really deploy?
So our record is currently 9. We have a standard that says that we must deploy at least once per day, but there's an absolute joy that goes through the entire company the more that we can deploy.
Oh, that's really interesting. So like company-wide, there's a mandate that you have to deploy every single day.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's impressive. 9 times per day is really impressive to hear. We work with a lot of companies, and there are not that many that have made it there yet. So my question is, how do you do this? What's actually the process that got you there? What's your secret sauce at Edmunds?
So the secret sauce is monitoring and testing throughout every single step. So from the time that a developer checks in their code, they're opening up a feature branch, but we can actually put that feature branch into a sandbox environment and allow them to test it at that level. So we get user acceptance from product teams before we ever even merge it into the main line of the code. And then as we deploy through our different development, QA, and staging processes, we are making sure that every step of the way it is tested. It tested both at the integration as well as the functional levels and performance. And we do not, we give that feedback to product and development teams very early on in the process so that they can, if they need to make fixes or there's a bug that's introduced, they can fix it very quickly.
Yeah, interesting. So it looks like you've got lots of checkpoints throughout the way, and at any one of those checkpoints, it seems like you can go ahead and roll back and go ahead and address whatever those issues are. Now, I know that there's so many companies that want to get to the point where you're at, where they're able to do canary testing, but they just don't know how to get there. Let's talk about tools for just a few minutes. Obviously, you use monitoring tools to help you understand what's happening in your pipeline and your production microservices. What are those main tools that you use, and how do you use those in this process?
So obviously we use Instana quite heavily. And Astana has been on board with us ever since the migration to clouds and to containers, as well as we use Grafana to be able to cross-correlate data with different data sources, which allows us to very early catch things that are going on and get the alerting out to the correct development teams.
Okay, so yeah, I think Daniel mentioned that earlier about pulling information together onto dashboards in Grafana. So let's take a second to talk to Daniel and talk about Grafana. Daniel, why don't you tell me more about Grafana? In particular, is Stephanie's use case a common one? Does Grafana offer up special capabilities that help companies while they're implementing CI/CD?
Yeah, so I would say Grafana was actually built for this from the start. So I used to work with the creator of Grafana at an e-commerce company, and that's actually the very first use case of Grafana was monitoring releases. So it's very common to like monitor things. This dashboard we're looking at here is more the infrastructure level, so like Kubernetes, and you know, we easily see the effect of release on, say, CPU or memory. You could also have it at a higher level and look at like application metrics or things like HTTP requests and you know, performance. Yeah, actually, this is a very good example from Wikimedia. So after every release, they use this for you know, web performance testing. You know, time to first paint on mobiles and desktops and things like that. And they're also using a feature here called Annotations, which you can sort of see. So every time they do release, it does this like marker on the graph, so they can correlate like any changes, and that can be like both ways. So sometimes they're making changes, they expect to see performance improvements, and they can check and see, you know, did it start exactly after our release, or like vice versa. I want to see if there's any regressions, any performance regressions. So what you monitor at release, I think, is very dependent on what sort of company you are, what you're building. It's also very common to use it for more like internal stuff. So we in the Grafana code base, for example, we are trying to eliminate implicit ANIs in our TypeScript code. So you see, this is where we start at 7,000 implicit ANIs, and we're trying to, like, every change you make, trying to remove more of them. So it's just, you know, refactoring our code and making it better. So we have a countdown there. So we're at 5,000. So hopefully in a few weeks we're down to 0. And we're also doing a migration from Angular to React. So you can sort of instrument your code base as well with Grafana. Goes hand in hand with CI. It's also really common things like, you know, your build pipelines, things like Jenkins, that you would monitor things like build times and test coverage, and have them on a dashboard. And this is like quite easy to do with something like if you have something that can collect the data, something like InfluxDB or with Telegraph or Prometheus with a node exporter. Then there's lots of existing dashboards that you can just reuse, and yeah, very, very common use case of this. You can also set alerts on this. So Griffon has alerting, so you could set an alert, for example, if build times increased or asset size got too big. So yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. And of course, there is an Instana data source for Grafana. So that's how we get our data into the Grafana dashboard. So some of those dashboards that you saw did have Instana data mixed with data from other sources. So it's a great way to amplify the value of both solutions. So I want to take just a minute to talk about Instana before we get back to Stephanie and the success that she's seen at Edmunds. Earlier, I mentioned that that Instana automatically discovers and monitors your full stack and the services that are running. Now, what's interesting about Instana is that services are a first-class citizen. So Instana is intently focused on helping you understand how your services are performing individually, but also how well they're working together to deliver that application functionality. So within Instana, it's really simple to create the concept of an application by picking an entry service and letting Instana group together all of the downstream services. So once that happens, you get the summary dashboard that you see here that gets created for you automatically. And from there, you can drill down into much more detail. So it basically is a great health overview that is really simple to get to. Now, with Instana, you can drill down into the individual traces of each request. So Instana monitors and traces every single request. These traces provide your SREs, DevOps, or developers with a very detailed understanding of the code execution and the API interactions between your services. So often this is one of the the end results that gets passed around from operations to development, or your DevOps teams look at these to make sure that the code and the interactions between the services are working properly. And then most importantly, we get to the automatic root cause capability within Instana. Now, remember earlier I mentioned that thing called the dynamic graph. Well, that continually, it updates the model, right? And we correlate events between the different services using that model, right? So anytime there's a service that is impacted by a problem, Instana will know if the dependent services are also impacted by that same problem. So Instana uses that dynamic graph to show you the services that are impacted and the infrastructure metrics that are possible causes of that problem. And the cool part is that all of this happens really within a few seconds, making life much easier for the people who have to go ahead and troubleshoot all of these issues in our complex microservices environments. All right, so that's enough about Instana for now. So while we're on the subject of metrics, it's really important for us to track various metrics as a group or company overall. There are many different metrics that most companies track, like the number of incidents or MTTR, MTTRS, revenue per hour, tons of different possibilities. What I have on the screen right now is a matrix from the State of DevOps report. So for DevOps in particular, there are key metrics that are touted by an organization called DORA, and these metrics can help you assess your DevOps maturity. And if you look at the matrix shown on the screen, you'll see that there are 4 key metrics and various stages associated with how those metrics are tracking. So if you can plot your own metrics on the table, then you can see exactly where to focus to move left and to improve your DevOps maturity. So Stephanie, I know that Edmunds tracks these metrics. Can you share those with us?
Yes, so as we spoke earlier, we have a goal to do at least 1 production per day, but our current high mark is at 9, and we regularly get 5 to 9 per day, which is really awesome. And then our lead time for change, so once a developer checks in, commits his code into a branch, it typically takes about 4 hours to go through our entire process and get it out to production. That allows us to ensure quality along the way. And then the time to restore a service, if we're having issues, is about 5 minutes. We take advantage of being able to roll back very quickly with the canary settings. And then failure rates has actually been declining over the years, and we are currently down to 1.6%.
Yeah, those are incredible metrics. Again, I get to talk to a lot of companies, and it is rare that I see such impressive numbers. Now, what I'd love to do is to map those to the chart that we just saw. So let's take a look at how those line up on the State of DevOps report. All right, those are absolutely incredible. So Edmunds hits the elite mark in basically every category. So that's a huge achievement. Most companies would certainly love to be at this state with their DevOps practices. All right, so let's now that we've seen those, let's take a look at metrics over time for just a second, because understanding metrics at any one given point in time is important, but it's also critical to see your trends over time. So Edmunds was also kind enough to share a couple of those charts with us. And so on this chart, you can see that Edmunds didn't always deploy multiple times per day, as we heard earlier. There was a progression, but this chart shows the point in time where Edmunds was able to achieve that goal. Now, that's great, but what's more impressive is the fact that, oh, we're missing a slide. So there's a missing slide right here that actually shows the rate at which we have events. And it is actually the inverse of this slide. So I'm not sure where that one actually went to, but that slide shows the inverse of this. So it was very high rate of alerts, and then it dropped off dramatically while in production. So it was the exact desired result, right? The whole point to being able to deploy faster, to be able to make these changes and to be able to roll them back quickly is that you don't bump into problems in your production environment while you're improving your code base really rapidly. So, so really impressive work on the side of the Edmunds team. So what we want to do is we want to take these your top 3 takeaways, Stephanie. What advice can you give our listeners that are going through their own journeys to Microsoft microservices and CI/CD?
Automate early and often. I cannot stress this enough. It is absolutely key to any CD system that you automate it. It provides the feedback and that to the development teams as well as the operations to let them know what's coming forward and where we need to go from here. And ask questions. So one of the things that I used to do when I first got to Edmunds was, and even though people would say, you know, we don't really need you in this war room, I would sit in every single war room, and the question I would ask and listen for is, why did it happen? And is there anything that we can do to prevent it in the future? These are critical because the more you ask that question, the better your testing becomes, the better your monitoring becomes, and the less problems are getting into production and affecting your end users. And then the other thing is to monitor everything. 1 or 2 metrics is not enough. You have to be able to, which is where automation comes into play, because one person can't monitor everything, obviously. So you have to be able to automate it, and you have to let it tell you when things are going wrong.
Yeah, great advice. You know, you mentioned war rooms there. I want to just take an aside really quickly to talk about that topic. So I've been in war rooms over time myself, and they're usually quite painful and they go on for a long time. Have you seen any changes in the way Edmunds conducts its war rooms or how that process works overall over time here as you've implemented more tooling and more processes?
We've seen that the number of war rooms and the amount of time needing to be spent in the war rooms has reduced greatly, because everybody knows what's going to be asked, what types of questions are going to be asked from the beginning, they're coming prepared. We have all of the monitoring set up and logging. So we know what took place. We generally can pinpoint it very early with tools like Astana and Grafana, and then we can get right to the point of, okay, this is what happened, this is what we need to do to mitigate the issue in the future, and here's where we need to proceed.
Yeah, okay, interesting. So let's go over to Daniel for a second. Daniel, what would be your advice for folks interested in either getting started with or expanding their usage of Grafana?
Yeah, so it's focusing on expanding, because I think that if you just use Grafana just to visualize, your IT metrics and your system metrics, it's amazing just to be able to see those things. But I just want to point out that Grafana can be used for any type of metric. So especially if you're going to show those metrics to people who are not IT people, then they probably won't understand them. But it's super powerful to be able to mix them with business metrics. So when I was working for an e-commerce company, we had a graph like with sales per minute. So when we had an outage, we could show like how much the outage cost and why it was worth, say, maybe investing more in our infrastructure to prevent that in the future. So it's like a very useful tool when you're talking to other people outside of your team. And following on from that, Griffon has very good support for SQL data sources. So these are not like specialized time series databases like something like Prometheus or Influx. But that's often where the business metrics live. And with Grafana, you can mix and match them on the same dashboard. Take select statement from an SQL database and put it beside your, say, Instana metrics. And the last point is that you don't have to start from scratch. There are loads of plugins and dashboards that are built by the community, and you can find them on grafana.com. That's also where you would find the Instana plugin.
Okay, perfect. So now it's time for us to answer some questions that you all submitted during the Fireside chat. And while we take a moment to compile those, I wanted to let everyone know that you can get your 14-day free trial of Instana at www.instana.com/trial. There's no credit card required, and it literally takes you about 5 minutes to get your application monitored. So now, please bring on the questions.
All right, we have gotten some great ones so far, but there's plenty of time. If you have a question for our panelists, please just go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your question. Our first question, let's see, how did you get sponsorship to spend time and effort on automation? I guess maybe that one is for Stephanie.
So one of the key pillars that Edmunds has is transparency and urgency. We want things done yesterday. And the only way we're going to be able to achieve that in today's market is to be able to automate it through the continuous delivery and integration. So that was the key driver for us to push forward and to automate and successfully get this into production.
Excellent. Okay, great. Next question. Did you have any issues trying to move from having separate UAT teams to getting the product team to sign off? I think that's for Stephanie's.
Yeah, there's always a change, a cultural change that has to undergo, because people get used to one set of processes. Edmunds does a very good job at this. Edmunds doesn't stand still. We are constantly updating everything. Our technology stack is constantly changing, which is one of the cool features of working for Edmunds, is because my skill set is constantly changing. But so I think it was a little easier at Edmunds because we're not a set in stone type of company. We encourage change and moving forward.
Excellent. All right, great. Let's see, next question. That's a Grafana question. Why did Grafana migrate from Angular to React? Is it totally completed, and how much time did that take?
Okay, that's a pretty technical question. The reason why is that Grafana was first built, I think, 2014. So it was built for Angular 1, long before React existed. And we sort of got stuck there on Angular 1.6. And we had to make a decision whether to go to Angular 4, I think, at the time. But we decided as an open source project, it's important to be sort of cutting edge. And I felt that maybe Angular 4 or whatever it is, Angular 6 now, hasn't really taken off. And it's sort of slowly dying. And that React was maybe a safer choice. And as the move from Angular 1 to the new Angular is nearly as much work as going to React, we decided to go to React. It's not totally completed. We're about halfway there. Because of course, we're not just doing a port, we're also trying to improve everything while converting from Angular to React. But it's going pretty smoothly. I reckon that we will be finished sometime around the end of 2019, but I wonder how long it will take to get rid of the last 5%. I think the 99% will get to anyway this year, and then it might take another year to get rid of the last percent. As we have lots of Angular plugins, I think we'll have to support those for a while, so we probably will have both Angular and React in the code base for probably another 2 years.
All right. The last 5% is always the longest, it seems like.
Yes.
Okay. All right, the next question, and I think this one is pretty much for anybody. How do you translate the technical metric to sell them to the business?
I can take a crack at it first, and then maybe Stephanie also has something to say. Yeah, I would say you can't just take your technical dashboards and show them to someone on the business side that just won't understand them. So you will have to do some sort of overview or translate them into financial terms. Things I was talking about before, like how much an outage costs, or things like capacity planning, or like proving that you're meeting your SLOs. Things like how long does it take to load a web page? You say, yeah, it's less than a second, and that's we're meeting our SLOs or uptime and things like that. So I think it's not so much about the the Grafana or the dashboards is more about just thinking generally, how do you take something technical and translate into terms that they understand.
Great. Stephanie, do you have anything you want to add on to that?
And I actually agree with Daniel, but it's important, and he mentioned this earlier, it's important that you mix your dashboard so that it shows both technical and business metrics. So we try to give them dashboards that will show not only what's happening technically, but how is that impacting the bounce rate, or how is that revenue impacting, things like that, things that they truly understand, so that they can correlate the data together.
All right, great. Just a reminder to folks, there's plenty of time for questions. So if you have a question, just go ahead and use that, go to Webinar Control Panel and submit it, and we'll just keep rolling along here. Next question, I believe, is for you, Stephanie. The 5-minute redeployment is for the app part, and then how long if you need to rebuild the database?
So if it's a database issue, we actually have blue-green environments so that we switch over to an environment that is already stood up, which is why it only takes 5 minutes for the database as well.
All right, great. Okay, let's see. Our next question, what kind of data does Edmunds use during the build pipeline to determine if a new release should be promoted to production or rolled back?
So we use a wide variety of data from both the front end and the back end perspective. Obviously, we're using latency at different percentiles. I'm a big believer that don't use averages when you're looking at that data. Exception rates, both the HTTP error responses as well as the exceptions in your logs. Is something going wrong? But on the front side, we're also looking at your hero shot load time, whether or not you have a high CPU usage on a front end client, those types of things. We are very quickly tracking it and being able to transfer that back to development.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Let's see. Next question. Let's see. Okay. How does Edmunds manage containers in production?
So we manage them through, everything right now is managed through AWS. We use the ECS container management. And then we are auto-scaling based on capacity testing and target tracking.
Okay, all right, great. Let's see. We've one more question here, and let's see. Just a final reminder for you guys, if you have a question, go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will get to it. Next question, how many engineers at Edmunds, let's see, have access to Grafana and Instana, and how do you teach them to use Grafana and Instana?
So we allow open access. Like I said earlier, one of our key pillars is transparency. We have open access to every member of Edmunds, whether you're development or on the business side or somewhere in between. But and we encourage everybody to use that. And we so Astana has, Edmunds has what we call Edmunds University, and we hold regular brown bags for the entire company to attend that, and they're recorded, so if future employees want to look at it, they can, in which we are going over Grafana, we're making, and Astana, making sure we're asking any questions. If you need some more one-on-one time, you can always schedule time with me or one of my teammates, and we're happy to go over how to use the products. Cool.
Awesome. All right, great. So we got another question. And what kind of metrics should we configure on Grafana to make sure we are improving release over release?
That depends on the type of business you have, but the way that we do it is we are pulling in metrics from Astana, like latency, error rates, those type of things. We are also linking back into Astana so that they can view the individual traces, which is a really nice feature of Grafana to link back. And then but from the business side, we take a look at our own internal data warehouse, and we are graphing things like run rates, bounce rates, whether or not we're actually funneling them into what we call our critical funnel, or are we losing them before that point, so we can track it very heavily.
Yeah, I would say as well that there's yeah, it really depends on what you're working on. So just for example, for the Grafana open source project, we track like the number of Grafana installs. So it's not something that like one release affects instantly. I mean, there's a lag maybe of at least a couple of weeks before you see any trends. But that's like our guiding star. You know, if we were to see a dip in that, then we're doing something wrong. We're you know, either being outcompeted by someone or we've messed up Grafana.
Mhm.
That's like a long-term metric. It's not something you would be looking at like every day. And then there's like the other type of metrics to make sure that you don't mess anything up more than are you improving. Like, you know, oh, I have you know, CPU usage metrics increased, or oh, are we suddenly seeing like thousands of errors? Things the obvious things. I think they're like the really short-term ones, like just after release. I mean, is everything still okay? Everything's up, everything's working. You know, all our customers can log into the website, or you know, click on the purchase button. And then I think you have both like, I don't know, other types of metrics, things like you know, technical metrics, like have we made changes to improve performance, or to you know, reduce like the amount of resources we use. So for example, for our cloud stuff, like we are Kubernetes cluster, so we're always trying to, you know, reduce the cost there. So can we do more with less? And you know, a lot of focus being that. So you're always looking at those metrics. So like for our hosted Prometheus and hosted Graphite, for example, they're looking at can they improve the query performance. So they're looking at you know, different percentiles. So like what's the 99 percentile look like? So for, you know, those absolute slowest queries, how slow are they? Can we improve that? But yeah, it really depends on like on what you're working on.
All right, great. So the bad and the good stuff. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to give the audience another minute or two to get in any last minute questions. And while we're waiting, I just want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if they miss any or all of it, or if they just want to watch it again, they will have the opportunity to do so. We will be sending out an email after today's event that includes a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the devops.com website. So you can always go there, take a look for it there. Just go to devops.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it will be right there waiting for you. Okay, well, it looks like that is all the questions that we have from the audience. So I will go ahead and close out the Q&A section unless we get up. We just got another one, and that's the way it always works. So let's go ahead and ask this one. What is the most technical challenging issue or problem that Grafana currently faces? And how does Grafana plan to solve it?
Oh, wow.
And
The
with
most,
a tough one.
the most, wow. I suppose what we're working on at the moment is better log support, but I don't know if that's the most technical challenging issue. I mean, the whole React Angular one was pretty tough. That was, so I don't know how much detail people want to hear, but our code base is a bit of a Frankenstein at the moment, where we have like Angular on the outside, which wraps like React components, which wrap Angular components, which wrap all the way down. It's just like this. And we're just gradually trying to remove all the Angular bits. And so like baby steps, because there was like no way we could just like in one big bang convert from Angular to React. It just has to be done in small steps. So we have to be still doing that while at the same time improving Grafana and releasing features. So that was, I suppose that's sort of already solved. So we figured out how to do that. And the other technical challenges, I suppose one of the other big ones we're looking at is how to add more security around queries, which is quite difficult because Grafana supports a lot of different data sources. So if you want to say limit people from querying certain databases or doing certain queries, it's something that we are just thinking about. It's much easier to solve at the database level, but there are some users that have asked that could Grafana also help out with that. So I don't really have a good answer to that one, though.
That's kind of a life, the universe, and everything kind of question. So good job answering it. All right, great. Well, I am going to just keep an eye on the queue, but while we're waiting to see if we get any more audience questions, and I did promise at the top of the hour that we would be doing a drawing for 3 $50 Amazon gift cards. So while we're waiting, we'll go ahead and do that. And our first winner for today's drawing is Bradley Lyon. Congratulations, Bradley. Our second winner is Larry Geter, I think it is, Geter. Congratulations, Larry. And our final winner for today is Sean Shell. Congratulations, Sean. All right, great. So I'm taking a look at the queue, but I've not seen any more questions come through. So I guess we're going to go ahead and ask this one final question. It just came in. Let's see. How does Instana compare to Nagios?
Okay, well, that's a question for me to take then. So, yeah, so Nagios is what we would consider an infrastructure monitoring tool. So remember, Instana is application performance monitoring. So our main focus, our primary focus, is on the health, understanding the health of your services and the application requests flowing through those services. So Instana, traces every single user request that flows end to end through all of your services. And this is something that you simply cannot get with a tool like Nagios. It wasn't created to do that. It's not the point of Nagios. So there's a little bit of overlap between Instana and Nagios in the infrastructure monitoring portion of our tool, where Instana can monitor your infrastructure, like your hosts and the processes and the containers, and pull key metrics there. But that's where the similarities end, and Instana is a very modern tool that is designed to, like I said, with our dynamic graph, it's designed to understand all of the interrelationships between every component that helps your service function. So those services sit on a stack of infrastructure components. So Instana understands the service, the full stack that it's sitting on, and all the relationships between all of the various services and all of those many different stacks that you've got deployed. So there's very little similarity between the two tools. They're intended for very different use cases. When you need to monitor microservices and understand if your users are having a good experience or not, you need an application performance management tool. So APM is what you need to look for, and Instana is that tool for your containerized microservices orchestrated type of applications.
Excellent. All right, great. Well, that is all the questions that we have, really, seriously. So I do want to thank everybody for joining me today, and especially Stephanie Bird, Daniel Lee, and Jim Hirschauer. Thank you guys for such a great presentation. Lots of good information. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Shirley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Want to also thank the audience for joining me today. And this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.